You know, if there is one character that is just universally dogged on more than any of the others, it would have to be Revenant. She's just a character that consistently finds herself at the bottom of every character tier list out there. Like if you go watch the latest Extra Life tier list, the first thing they do is place Revenant at the bottom, which is just hilarious. But you know, Guardian has his flock and they defend him. Weeps and furries like Executor. And Raider mains kinda agree that he's great for base game, but kinda falls off after depth 3 in Deep of Night, because tanking just becomes much less viable at higher depths. But for Revenant, all I hear is negativity. Every time there is an update, people joke about how the devs are gonna buff Iron Eye and nerf Revenant. Get it? Because Revenant is so weak, it's so funny guys. I even see people go as far as saying that Recluse is straight up a better Faith caster than Revenant, or that Undertaker makes it so that there is no reason to play Revenant anymore. And well, when you hear these things being repeated over and over again, it really starts to get to you. Like, I made a Revenant guide near the game's launch, and in it I said that I really liked Revenant. I then started playing the character, and over time I too started to think that she was trash, just because of how much I kept hearing it. And well, as you can tell, today I'm gonna make the argument that Revenant is not nearly as bad as people say she is. I think she's actually in a pretty good spot right now, and I'll do that by addressing common complaints that people have with her. And well, unlike with my previous videos, I will actually address Deep of Night this time, because the video would just be incomplete otherwise. So pretty much all of the footage that you'll see will be from that mode at depths 4 and 3. Before we get into it though, let's talk about what I'm not saying in this video. I'm not saying that Revenant should never get a buff. Now, I don't think she needs one, and despite that people keep saying that she's been completely ignored by the devs, I think she's already gotten quite a few buffs actually, and I'll explain that later. But I wouldn't be against her getting even more love from the developers. I'm also not saying that she has a low skill floor. Like no, she's not the easiest character to pick up and play. I don't think she's the hardest one to pick up either, but you do need to put in some work. What I am saying though is that you're not nerfing yourself by choosing her if you know what to do. She's not a meme choice, she's a legitimately good pick. Kinda like how people agree that Scholar requires a bit of knowledge and skill to shine, but he's still a very good character. So without any further ado, let's get into it. First, let's address complaint number 1. She doesn't have a way to get her FP back like Recluse does. I think this is by far the biggest complaint people have with Revenant, and I get it. The game presents a caster character that can recover FP with her ability, only to give you another caster character that just can't do that. And this just leads us to feel that the second character is incomplete in some way. Well, in response to that, I would say that Recluse needs a way to recover FP, because otherwise she has no other way to attack at the start of the game. But Revenant has what Recluse doesn't, which is a good damaging melee weapon that scales with her stats. And you're even able to modify that weapon with certain relics to give it things like status effects or ideally Hoarfrost Stomp, so that you can clear trash mobs very quickly and inflict frostbite on bosses. This is something that Recluse just cannot do. Not to mention that you have a dodge that is more suitable for melee combat, you have summons that take aggro and deal decent damage, and all of these tools are available to you even when your FP runs out. Now, it is true that you'd need to go out of your way to upgrade this melee weapon, so that you can have it do well in the mid to late game. But I don't think that you need to do that, because it is effective enough in the early game as is. And by the mid to late game, Starlight Shards become more available, and these kinda solve all of your FP problems, and they're not really that uncommon. Not to mention that before day 3, Starlight Shards are obviously not the only way to get your FP back. You're constantly getting your FP back by just touching graces, and these are everywhere. Like you get ones just randomly scattered around the map, and you get a new one every time that you kill a boss. And if you keep a balance between melee and spells, then the FP you get from these graces is usually more than enough to last you for the next big fight that you get in. You might say, well, okay, Revenant is a more capable melee fighter than Recluse, obviously. But Recluse is still a better Faith caster, because Revenant has to rely so much on graces and Starlight Shards. Well, take it from someone that has spent more time with Recluse than any other character. Recluse too is very reliant on these things, and Starlight Shards are the main way she gets FP back in the late game. Recluse only gets back 20 FP by absorbing elements, and this doesn't scale with your level or your FP bar, so it really starts to fall off by the end game. If you're relying on elemental absorption for your FP as Recluse in the end game, then you're gonna have quite a bit of trouble, because you can only use it 3 times before you have to cast a cocktail. And because you're probably only absorbing elements for FP, you're probably not gonna end up with the most useful cocktail to use in the fight that you're in, so you might end up wasting time casting it just so that you can start absorbing FP again. And And so what I always end up doing with the day 3 bosses as Recluse is that I only use her skill to absorb elements I need for the cocktail I have in mind, and just rely on Starlight Shards otherwise. Another thing I want to bring up is the fact that Recluse just consumes more FP on average. Like, unless you equip certain relics, she's more focused on sorceries than incantations. And incantations are just more FP efficient. Like Discus of Light, for example, consumes so little FP that you'd almost never need to use Starlight Shards when you find it. And most of the other incantations can be charged to give you more damage for the same FP cost. And the same just cannot be said about sorceries. The last thing I want to say about FP is that, well, there are relics that can help you with FP management. The new relic that gives you passive FP regeneration is completely useless for Revenant, because the FP regen is very slow and it is meant to complement a playstyle that is more reliant on weapon arts. And the Deep of Night effect that gives you more FP is also pretty bad. Dark Knight of the Wise, though, is a perfect relic to solve all of your FP problems. You get this one by defeating Everdark Noster. And well, it gives you 25 more FP to work with from the get-go. It gives you 18% more maximum FP every time that you visit a Sorcerer Rise. And it gives you 11 FP with successive attacks in melee. And this is especially good to use against enemies that get summoned before day 1 and day 2 bosses, because you have as much time as you want to defeat them. So ideally you don't want to waste much FP on them in the first place, so why not recover some FP by killing them too? Now let's talk about complaint number 2, RNG. And it's that you're just not guaranteed to find the spells that you want. And you might end up with spells that bosses are resistant to. And this is the biggest complaint I had with Revenant. But this is also where the devs listened the most, because contrary to popular belief, Revenant got quite a few buffs with the DLC. Like, it doesn't matter that the devs didn't have a patch note saying that they buffed Revenant's summons, because, well, look at these 5 new relic effects. These are new relic effects that change which incantation you start a run with. And thing is, only Revenant starts with incantations, so these are 5 relic effects that were specifically added for Revenant. We're gonna talk about these more in a bit, but well, there is yet another change that buffs Revenant by quite a bit, specifically in Deep of Night. And it's the fact that you can now switch relic presets in the character selection screen at the start of each run. And what this means is that specializing in specific spell schools is now optimal. It's not at all a gamble anymore, because unless you get a specific curse, the game shows you which Night Lord that you're going up against, and you can just choose which setup that you want to use based on that. And this is by far the biggest buff Revenant got, because it used to be that you just specialize in a random spell type, and then you wouldn't be guaranteed to find spells from that type. And then you might be forced to fight a Night Lord that is most resistant to that type. But these issues now don't really exist anymore, especially with how you can now just start with a spell type that the Night Lord is weaker to, and have a build that boosts that spell type. I mean, think about this. You went from potentially being forced into being at a mathematical disadvantage to now being able to guarantee an advantage. And this is really quite a big deal. Like, this is the true reason I think Revenant is still the best incantation caster in this game. She's the only character that starts with a seal, and this just means that she's the only one that can just use them while completely ignoring RNG. Not to mention that she's the only one that finds seals by default, while the other characters need to use a relic slot for that. Now let's circle back to the spells that you can actually start with, because if these were bad, then my argument would just make no sense. Well, fortunately, these are actually quite decent, and the only one that I don't like is Dragonfire, because it consumes too much FP. Lightning Spear is so good that it is the optimal spell that you should have for 2 of the Night Lords, and it is a pretty good option for pretty much all of the other ones, except Adele. Beast Claw is arguably just as good, because it's one of the 2 spells that you really want to have if you specialize in bestial incantations, and it deals physical damage, so you kinda don't have to worry about elemental weaknesses anymore. Now, Wrath of Gold and O Flame are a bit more situational, in that you probably don't want to use them for the Night Lords because of their shorter range, but they can absolutely destroy many of the bosses that come before that because of their insanely high damage. Although Wrath of Gold does have a downside of not counting as a fundamentalist incantation, so you can't boost it with these relics. One final spell I want to talk about is Giant's Flame Take Thee, which is not a spell that you can start with, but it's the default spell on Giant Seals. It used to be that these had Flame Sling on them, which wasn't even a Giant Flame incantation, but they now have this. And this one change made specializing in Giant Flame incantations go from being completely useless to just being one of the best spells that you can go for, because out of all the spells that are there by default on more common seals, this is probably the best one. I want you to join my Discord server. You know, being a part of a community while it's still small is very fun in my opinion. And I want you to come ruin it by joining, so that you can enjoy it while making it worse for those who come after. just like the boomers did in America. We have an LFG channel where you can play Nightreigning with me and other members of this community. There's no reason for you not to join. Link in the description below. Now let's talk about complaint number 3, and that is the fact that her summons are squishy. I want to specifically address the very widespread idea that the health of her summon should scale with depth in Deep of Night. And here I'd say that none of the other characters have their skills scale up with depth in Deep of Night. In higher depths, every character starts to rely a bit less on their character abilities and more on just raw damage, skill, and just better relic setups. This is the purpose of this game mode. Why would the devs just give you a buff there? I feel people want to treat their summons like their Elden Ring phantoms, and they're just not. It looks to me like people want to summon their phantoms at the beginning of a fight and just have them help with the entire fight while they forget about them like they do in that game. But unlike in base Elden Ring, you have 3 summons. You can cycle between them or unsummon them to put them out of danger. And if they die or you unsummon them, then they start healing. And so if you pay attention, you can usually guarantee that they don't die useless deaths by getting caught up in an AoE, for example. And if you really don't want them to die, then you can use your ultimate and just guarantee that they stay alive for 15 seconds. Like, I think you're already given the tools to give them as much uptime as possible. Not to mention that they're very squishy in the base game mode too. And bosses are very aggressive in this game, so unless FromSoft drastically increases their health across the board, I don't see this being that much of a solution. Like, the buffs that we've already got are much better for Revenant than this would have ever been. I would also say that as squishy as they are, your summons are still doing their job quite well, even in higher depths. If they're not pulling aggro, then they're dealing decent damage. And when they do pull aggro, they're taking a hit that could have been aimed at you, and they're just giving you time to breathe or a damage window. Like, look, Frederick just being here is kinda confusing this 3 Sentinel by making him constantly switch aggro. And when Frederick finally gets one shot, he's basically done his job by letting my friend get out of range. Or like here in solo, where I used him to distract this early game boss so that I can kill it very quickly. Or look at this moment where I left Sebastian at a down teammate and he ended up reviving him even though I was running away. And you know what? I was playing very badly here and I missed all of my incantations and I ran out of Starlight Shards as a result. And I obviously didn't have my ultimate here, but the friend that I revived did, and he ended up saving the run. And this is really just not something that you can do with any other character. Finally, I want to talk about the relic build that I'm using for Deep of Night. Basically, I'm using 3 main effects. I'm stacking both the normal and +1 version of the effect that gives me ultimate charge back every time that an enemy dies. And in addition to these 2 effects, I'm using the effect that buffs my teammate damage by 25% each time that I use the ultimate. And the result is that I can more or less use my ultimate in every fight to end it much sooner, and then just get it back as soon as possible. Of course, you can still do this to some extent in the normal mode, you just wouldn't be able to use the +1 version of this effect. I think this is all that I had to say about Revenant though. Let me know what you think of her. Do you still think she's bad? Did I convince you she's good? Or did you always think she was good? Let me know in the comments below. That's all for now though. Bye-bye!